Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net.
Okay, we're back after a break, but it's not like we were just goofing off. David made a 30-minute Zoom meeting. I tell you, this man is just an animal when it comes to putting out the truth. There's no stopping him. But I tell you, this has been powerful. And, you know, the last thing that we were talking about, you were talking about how a lot of people have taken down the statues of Francis Scott Key. They considered him associated with slavery because of a mention of it in the 4th stanza of the national anthem. But, you know, James Brown, Tony Dungy have become very good friends of mine. I really respect those guys, and man, they're just awesome.
They're good.
But they deal with all of these pro athletes, which, 75% of them are black? We were talking about that too. If we were going to have affirmative action, we ought to get the whites together and demand that you make a certain percentage be white. But anyway, they deal with a lot of these black pro athletes who are taking a knee. And we've discussed this very candidly, and they say it's not about disrespect or lack of patriotism, that they've got this issue, and that's what it means to them. But you know, all that says to me, and again, I love JB, and they're dealing with that. I'm not criticizing them. There's people on both sides of the issue. But all that says to me is it's not about lack of patriotism to them, but for 200 years, it's been absolutely patriotic. And for them to just change the narrative and say, no, here's what we see the flag as, that is violating 200 years of history. So would you give us a little background on, you know, about the people there keeping the flag up? If they had just lowered the flag, they could have survived, and yet they refused to do it.
Yeah, especially within the black community historically. By the time you get to the Civil War, you have 2 separate flags flying over the nation. And the one that is associated with slavery, Confederate flag, the other was associated with Indian slavery. And from the black perspective, that's what they saw. And so it's interesting that during the Civil War, for anybody who's seen the movie Glory, you see what happened there, but Sergeant Wall and then Sergeant Carney. And it's interesting. Let me back up from a military standpoint. When you're in the middle of war like that and you don't have communications like we do today where you can talk to one another, everything was done off flags. And so whoever was carrying the flag was in charge of the battle. And if the flag wheels to the right, then all the other guys will see where it's going and they'll turn with it. And so he's in charge of the battle. So the flag is really super important. So you choose your best guy to handle the flag. So in the Civil War, at the Battle of Fort Wagner, it was Sergeant Wall, John Wall. And so he goes up, and of course, if you're the enemy, who's the first guy you want to take out? The guy carrying the flag. And so you get that flag down, and then they scatter because they don't know what their commands are. So Wall got shot. So Carney dropped his rifle, dropped his thing, grabbed the flag before it hit the ground, and he led the charge on, Fort Wagner. Fort Wagner, I think, is the battle. And so he led the charge there right at the Confederates, got there. They had been bombarding the Confederates for 3 days. They thought they had them beat down, and it turned out the Confederates just hiding behind stone walls. And when all this black regiment got there, they popped up and started shooting them. And so Wall gets shot. He actually ends up getting shot 4 times, and because he's carrying the flag. And they kept trying, Sarge, let me take the flag. No, nobody's taking the flag but me. And so he ends up getting the Medal of Honor because he would not let the flag hit the ground. When he got back to the group, last thing he said, boys, I never let the flag touch the ground. Then he fainted from loss of blood and they grabbed the flag as he fell. So he's the earliest in the Civil War, earliest engagement in the Civil War to receive the Medal of Honor. However, there are a bunch of black Civil War Medal of Honor recipients who got the Medal of Honor strictly because they would not let the flag be dishonored. To them, it's everything they're fighting for. That's what's going to provide freedom and equality. Everything they're fighting for was that flag. A number of those guys in battle that went on to become congressmen afterwards, like John Roy Lynch, who had been freed. He was in Mississippi and was freed by the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, went on to become a congressman, a long-time congressman. He talked about, we love the flag. We'll give our life for that flag. He said, I can't tell you how many patriotic black men have given their life for that flag. And so the respect for the flag was so high. Now, the Confederate flag, that's a different story, but not the American flag.
Well, let's go back to...
And by the way, one more to throw at you, too, was fun. We have a collection of tens of thousands of original things, and one is the 10th Calvary, which was after the Civil War. It was a black unit that continued to serve in the Calvary, and so they were in the Indian Wars and et cetera. It's interesting. We have their logo banner that they would fly when they would go in formation, and it is the 10th Cav, and it has a big American flag on it, and it says, "We love thee," is the logo for the flag. And so there you have the black soldiers. There were Buffalo soldiers at that point in time, and that's their logo. We want the American flag. This is what we love. And so to take that perspective of black history and to jump it forward to where that even 5 years ago, you only had 2 or 3 guys kneeling, and now it's all but 2 or 3 guys kneeling. Yeah. You know, what happened in the last 5 years that changed that? Nothing. Yeah.
So let's go back to when the Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner, and you correct me on these things, you know the dates better than I do, but I think it was September 1814. It's during the War of 1812. The White House had just been burned, and parts of the Congress and stuff the month before, and so the British had this huge armada there bombarding Fort McHenry, and Francis Scott Key came on a boat to negotiate the release of captives, and because they started the shelling of Fort McHenry, he had to stay on the boat until the next morning. And they said that if you'll just lower the flag, we will stop the bombardment, you can survive. And that basically would have given the British the victory, War of 1812. And yet they had direct hits on that flag, and yet they actually propped that flag up with dead bodies of people that had been exploded. And that was part of that Star-Spangled Banner, is it's still waving. And so when a person sits there and kneels and shows disrespect, they can say, well, it's not about patriotism to me, but for 200 years, that's what people remembered about the national anthem and stuff. Am I correct on these things?
I mean, they remember that.
You can correct me if I'm...
Oh, no. There's a lot there in that story that goes with that narrative, because that narrative, it's interesting. The commander of that fort said, I knew at some point the British were going to come here. I mean, the War of 1812, it's a logical step to go from D.C. to there. He said, and I wanted to make sure they did not miss their way, so he went and had Mary Pickersgill make a massive American flag. It's like 80 by 120. He said, I wanted the British to see it from a long way off. And so he made that, because they had a storm flag that they flew when the wind was rough, but he put that one up when the British got there. And the deal is, they went through 2 days and nights of just pounding, just intense pounding by all the British ships. And if the Americans surrendered and take that flag down, then the battle's over. And that's what Key was watching for. If that flag dips, if it goes down. But see, the whole view of a flag back then was, our view of the flag has changed because the Supreme Court decision in the 1970s, the Johnson decision, said it's okay to burn and desecrate the flag. Prior to the 70s, no, it's not. These guys gave their life for that, and that's why every war, that American flag, I mean, if a World War II vet saw you desecrate the flag, he would have punched you out, because that was his buddies who died.
That's right.
You know,
that's right.
And again, it goes back to the fact that people don't know history, and they look at it only through where they are at this moment in time.
We look at it in the post-'70s era, and in the post-'70s era, where we've been taught don't respect anything, the Supreme Court chopped down so many things. It took out prayer, took out Bible, took out, you know, all the traditional values, including the traditional value of the country of standing for that flag. I mean, there were other flags you could point to for racists, but not that one. That's not the one you point to.
And let's speak to the issue of the argument that was made, because I heard it too. Oh no, this has nothing to do with the flag. This has to do with police brutality and social justice. But look, there are all kinds of ways to protest police brutality. I'm pro-life, The Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade said that abortion was legal. I don't like that one bit. I think it's morally wrong.
That's right.
Spiritually wrong. Frankly, as a lawyer, I think it's legally wrong.
That's right.
Constitutionally wrong. But what's that got to do with me disrespecting the flag of our country, which, from my perspective, represents the sacrifices that others have made for the freedom that we now enjoy. It represents the highest ideals of the nation, knowing we're not perfect, but that flag represents our desire to become what? A more perfect union. And it represents the pride that we ought to have in the fact that we can all rally around that symbol, that represents all of us.
Right.
You know, you can pick at other things and say, well, that might represent one group or this group. That represents all of us. So when you kneel for that, I said from the very beginning that when Colin Kaepernick began that, he was expressing disdain and disrespect for our country. Now, anybody who denies that is just not looking at the facts. Well, finally, recently, we know he said, I am not celebrating July 4th because I'm not celebrating your white supremacist holiday, which means that he's saying the very legitimacy of the country is not to be respected. So I think that anybody who really cares about this country should say, okay, if there's a problem, you really believe there's a problem with police brutality, I think we've argued effectively, yeah, there's a problem perhaps, but it's not an epidemic. The epidemic lies elsewhere. The epidemic lies in black-on-black crime. The epidemic lies in abortion. You want to look at where black lives are really being taken.
Destruction of all families, of all races.
Of families. But fine, you want to protest that? Great, have at it. Let's figure out a way for millionaires to create a platform in which they can do that. Why do you use the American flag and the national anthem as an opportunity to do that? I mean, frankly, it makes me personally angry. My grandfather fought in World War I on my mother's side. I donned a Marine Corps uniform, and you did too, and took an oath of office.
No, I wasn't a Marine.
But you were?
I was Army.
Army, okay.
I was
That's
the
okay.
real.
That's okay. You were a real military person, right?
Now, see, here's another thing. See, you are a Marine, and I'm Army, and there's this conflict.
Do I need to get between? Maybe I should move over there between you.
It has nothing to do with color. It's just people are always fighting it.
Exactly. And of course, we do this in good humor. But my point is, Americans who love this country, who might even agree that there's a problem with police brutality, are going to say,
oh, absolutely.
why do you disrespect the American flag? And frankly, look, they argue that Francis Scott Key owned slaves. You pointed out that he also was a defender of the freedom, pro bono, by the way, of slaves and helping people to obtain their freedom. But my attitude is this. I am tired of being told that all of our symbols, our Declaration of Independence, our country itself is illegitimate because the people who came before us were somehow flawed and weren't perfect. I mean, on that basis, since Paul was not a perfect human being, maybe we should throw out all the Pauline epistles.
He killed somebody along these same lines, said even Jesus was a sinner.
Yes.
Well, see,
I forgot who that was.
That was Don Lemon of CNN.
I immediately
of the Communist News Network.
wrote Ichabod over that person.
Hey,
let me ask you about this. How about the people playing the black national anthem right along with our national anthem? What do you think of that?
Look, first of all, there's no such thing as a black national anthem.
I'd never heard of it.
Because there's no black nation. So you can't have a black national anthem. The song is Lift Every Voice and Sing, I think written by James Weldon Johnson, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a song that's been sung. I've been at churches where it's sung. Perfectly nice song, but not as a replacement of the national anthem, which unites us all. You know, this is a point that needs to be driven home too. One of the reasons why I love the flag, I get emotional about the flag. I thought the whole point of the civil rights movement, David and Andrew, was to end considering people on the basis of skin color and to bring us together as one nation. And what we've got now with Black Lives Matter and Colin Kaepernick and this whole movement is really driving a wedge between all of us. It's denigrating all quote-unquote white people, all black people are victims, all white people are oppressors. I mean, at what point, for the sake of the next generation, do we say, look, we've got to come together, knit our country together? I mean, that's, in fact, people, and David, you can comment on this, but one of the motivations behind not persecuting people who fought for the Confederacy was, yeah, they were wrong, but we've still got to be a nation.
Yeah,
that's right.
We still got to come together. We still got to figure out a way to forgive people and work together. And Abraham Lincoln had that attitude.
Yeah.
And now we want to fight the Civil War all over again and say, no, they're not worthy of any consideration. They're not human beings. They should be completely ostracized. I mean, at some point, we've got to stop obsessing over what we perceive others have done to us and start obsessing over what God wants to do with us.
And this is not just spontaneous and people just doing things on the spur of the moment. It's orchestrated.
Oh, you bet.
We've mentioned that. But we had Bill Federer with us back in July. You were part of that panel. And Bill was actually living in Ferguson, Missouri when, what was the guy's, Michael Brown?
Michael Brown.
When he was killed by the police, and that was under Obama's deal. They can't blame Trump for that one. And anyway,
Sure
they had all of these riots and stuff, and he was living there, and he said that there were people that actually filed lawsuits against Soros because they had been promised $5,000 per person if they would turn these peaceful protests into riots, and he didn't pay up. And they took him to court. And of course, he settled out of court and paid them and stuff. But he said that in Ferguson, Missouri, everybody knew that they were being paid. They were bringing people in from out of state to turn these riots into things.
Yeah, that's happened in a lot of the riots, even going back to the Charlottesville riots a few years ago. The same group paid the bus company that brought the white supremacists, that brought the black activists. The same group paid for both companies and got them there, and they had a conflict. Now, neither one of the two groups knew that was going to happen, but they were brought there for that purpose, and there's the same people who paid for both sides. So there is a reason to have disruptive, because it dominates the news, it elevates their issues, it allows them to have protest what they did. But when you look at Dallas, for example, how is it all these spontaneous protests had pallets of bricks waiting on them and all the right?
Well, it just happened.
I had a pallet of bricks in my knapsack that I bought.
Those are the same people that believe evolution just happened.
Exactly. Well, when they got chased out of Dallas and went to Fort Worth, suddenly there were all these pallets of frozen water bottles to throw at the cops. Right. In Texas in the summer, you have pallets of frozen water bottles, spontaneous. No, this stuff is orchestrated. It is well funded. There are known, but see, the thing that people don't understand is Marxism. It requires violence to make its progress. It requires confrontation. They're going to find ways to keep stoking the fire, and they're going to keep moving this, because if socialism is what you want, you make it really violent so that they say, okay, I'll accept socialism if you guys will just stop the violence. And well, that disrupts the whole nation. We will not be America anymore. But to get to there, they have to go too far so that we'll settle for something less.
They have to create chaos. People will accept change.
They have to create chaos. And we'll settle anything if the violence will just stop. No, we can't do that.
And let's throw this into the mix. You have to bring people to a point where in the wealthiest nation, the most prosperous nation that offers the greatest opportunity to every human being who wants to take advantage of it, you've got to bring people to a point where somehow they hate it, they resent it, they're bitter against it. And this is where Marxism comes in through Antonio Gramsci, because Antonio Gramsci was an Italian communist who really took Marx's theory and said, you don't simply need violence, you got to overtake the culture. You got to create a new cultural hegemony. You got to change the values of cultures from within, because Antonio Gramsci argued, these prosperous capitalist societies like the United States of America aren't held together by force. They're held together because people love it.
By choice.
Their choice. They want it. And you've got to change their reasons for wanting it. And so you get in, you attack everything, including the church. So the purpose of the church is not salvation and a relationship with God. The purpose of the church is social justice. Jesus was a socialist. The purpose of the university is not to educate people about facts and history and science and math. No, it's to teach them a polemic about the injustice of your society.
What we would call indoctrination rather than education.
And on and on and on it goes. And look, the purpose of the media, we were talking earlier about the media and how they become propagandists. Well, the media, many of them have said now, that we shouldn't give both sides. One side doesn't have a right to be heard because it's so bad. So they basically
and
declare
social media
themselves.
Social media platforms doing that right now.
Big
They're
tech
shutting
doing
down.
the same thing.
That's right.
Actually censoring the president and some of his things that he's done.
And these are all American institutions supposedly buttressed by our ideas like freedom of speech. You all remember the day, I mean, I'm sure we all remember, when we as Americans used to say, I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend with my life your right to say it.
Yeah.
That's gone. Because now the left says, if I don't like what you say, I'm going to stop you from saying it.
And
you won't
yet
have an opportunity
they will
to say
accuse any Christian of you're intolerant.
And
yet
hateful.
they are the ones who
Yeah.
are
And
intolerant.
a big-
That's Romans 2:21. Thou that accusest another accuses thine own self also. Usually what you accuse other people of is what you have trouble with yourself.
Well, and that's what the left is doing.
That's what's going on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the virus and the, it's been a factor in all of this
Oh, yeah.
stuff.
It set the groundwork for this to be able to happen.
And so what's happened in history with pandemics?
Pandemics, and actually, COVID's no longer a pandemic. They downgraded it. There wasn't enough deaths with it. So,
Really?
Yeah, it's no longer officially a pandemic. They have taken it down. So, but that hadn't changed the fear factor, and everybody's still hyped up over it. What's happened over the 400 years we have American history, we've averaged a medical pandemic probably every 15 years for 400 years. So there's nothing new. We had a number of measles pandemics. We had scarlet fever. We had polio for a number of times. We had cholera, diphtheria. We've had 4 major flu pandemics. The Spanish flu and the Asian flu and the Hong Kong flu and the swine flu. We've had those. I mean, there's just a long list I can give you. What's interesting is where we are today. If you take the mortality rate of COVID right now, it's 0.04%. So if you take all the deaths in America, divide that by population, you get the mortality rate. You're at about 0.04%. Okay, let's go to the smallpox epidemic in the 1600s. Mortality rate was 70%. Not 4/100s, it was 70%.
This is worldwide?
It was in America. Well, it was in several places, but in America we measured it because we had measured it. So today that would be like having 240 million Americans dead today in the nation. So if you take the worst city in the nation today, New York City, they're at 0.4%. They're 10 times higher than the rest of the nation. They're 0.4%. If you take Philadelphia in the 1793 yellow fever epidemic, it was 25%. That's 100 times higher than New York is. So we've had many pandemics, much more lethal, much worse. Even if we jump back to the 1918 Spanish flu, or actually 17, 18, 19, 20 Spanish flu, we had half the population where we are now, and 675,000 died then with half the population. And we didn't shut the economy down. We didn't shut schools down. What we did was there were times we voluntarily asked churches, they said, would you guys mind backing off for a month or so? And they did. And Spanish flu, the churches got back together and said, hey, government, we've been shut for a month. We're coming back online. Government didn't have the right to tell churches when to meet or when not to meet.
Still don't.
Right.
And so what's happened is as I've watched this one, several things are brand new. One is that we can specifically point to a number of rights that have been attacked that have never been attacked before. There's 5 rights in the First Amendment. 4 of them have come under direct attack in this COVID epidemic. The only one that didn't come under attack was freedom of the press. I wonder why none of the governors went after the press. They went after churches and petition and speech and assembly, but not. So the press got a free ride. But did go after the Second Amendment. The mayor of Jackson said, hey, we can't have guns in this COVID thing, so we're going after guns. And then the Third Amendment essentially says government can't set up shop in your house, is what it amounts to. It can't quarter troops there. But now we're saying, I heard, Andrew, that you were at a mall and somebody had COVID, so now we're going to put an ankle bracelet on you. We're going to make sure you stay in your house. No, government can't just keep you quarantined in your house. And by the way, the Fourth of the Eighth Amendments says that you have due process to punish the guilty, not the innocent. Well, we're quarantining all the innocent, not the guilty. And now we got mayors out in California saying, I told you you can't have meetings at your house, even 5 people. If I hear you have a meeting, I'm going to shut off your electricity. No, separation of powers. You don't get to be the judge and the Congress and the enforcement arm. And so we got a mayor doing all things. We have separation of powers constitutionally.
And yet they're doing that.
They're doing it. And see, this is the same thing we're talking about with Black Lives Matter. Because we don't know our history, We buy into stuff because we don't know our Constitution.
Yes.
We're buying into stuff that we shouldn't be buying into. There's no previous generation that would have allowed all these rights to be stepped on with impunity. And by the way, how serious is COVID? Well, it's serious for all who had it. The mortality rate, again, is very low. But I'll just take Texas as an example, since I'm from Texas. Last I checked, COVID was number 14 leading cause of death in Texas. How come, if lives are what we're after, why didn't we do something on the first 13 things that are higher death? Some of them are 10 times higher than the COVID death rate in Texas. We haven't shut down government over that. So why have we done this? We've generated and created and instilled fear.
Yep. When
the numbers don't justify it. It's not even the pandemic we keep calling it. It's been downgraded from a pandemic. But fear, and here's, I'm going to throw out a little speculation. Historically, one of the things that really got me years ago when I was reading old biographies of people was the last chapter always dealt with how they died. And it was, I don't care if you're George Whitefield or if you're Thomas Paine, if you're an agnostic or if you're a preacher, we want to see how you died. And the reason they explained was Hebrews 2:15 says that if you have a relationship with God, with Jesus, you have no fear of death. So let's say Whitefield preached to 100,000 people, and he comes and he looks death in the eyes as he's dying and he shows fear and panic. We say, you know what, he really didn't know Jesus after all. Fear and panic. So they waited until after you died to see if you really were a Christian, John Wesley and everybody else. You may have professed to be a Christian. How did you die? So if you take that the fear of death the Bible talks about, what we have now is polling-wise, this is the most secular America we've had in our history. Only 6% of the nation has a biblical worldview, 1 out of every 16. So we're the most secular we've been, and the two most secular institutions in America are media and academia. Those are the two that would be the most scared of death. And if you're media and you're scared of dying, you're going to create panic everywhere. You're going to take every negative report you have and you're going to blow it up because you're scared of dying. You don't know Jesus and you're scared of dying, and so you're going to minister fear to everybody else. And that's where a lot of this has come from. It's a ministry of fear because the people who have the mouthpieces are themselves secular, which means they are more fearful of death than most are. And so, you know, historically, I think that's the other thing we're facing here is we're letting people minister fear to us because they themselves don't have any kind of relationship with God.
Yeah,
So because they don't have that relationship with God, fear of death is trumping the Constitution.
Trumps the Constitution.
Economy.
I mean,
it's hysteria. Yeah, they've created hysteria.
One of our leaders in Texas, one of our big city leaders, mayor, he was so panicked when this started. He says, the stats show that 495,000 are going to die just in Texas alone. And so he locked it down. Well, it's less than 3,000, and it's still locked down. Now, your numbers have been dead wrong, but your fear is still real, and so you haven't changed your policies. You're still planning like it's 495,000, and it never got anywhere close.
Let me speak this issue, too, of the constitutionality. Now, when this first started, one of the first things that became obvious was the level of ignorance that the American people have in their constitutional rights. Because I was saying it for our governor in Virginia, because a governor or a mayor says something doesn't make it law.
That's right.
But everybody was saying, once the mayor issued an edict, once the governor issued an edict, it's the law. No, it's not the law. I mean, it's really the equivalent of nothing more than a suggestion or recommendation. Not to mention, I'm convinced that if instead they had said, look, this is what we think is happening, this is what we're recommending to the American people right now, so how we're asking you to cooperate, they probably have had overwhelming cooperation.
I agree. I think they would have voluntarily. They would have done it.
But instead, oh no, we're issuing orders. And I want to underscore that. The mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, said, any church or synagogue that meets after having been told not to do so, we will close them down permanently. The mayor of Chicago and her health director threatened, literally, get this, threatened to bulldoze buildings of any church or institution that met against their orders. Now, if that's not totalitarianism,
that's why we have due process. That's why we have courts of law. And when this thing was starting to go, and Gavin Newsom out in California was shutting churches down, and they were starting to push back, and so then there were 200 pastors that was going to say we're going back to church, and then it got to 1,500, and then 3,000. I did some Zoom meetings with groups of pastors, and they said, we really have a dilemma here. And the dilemma is that we're told in 1 Peter 2 and Romans 13 that we're to obey our authorities. And the governor's told us we can't go back to church. And I went, time out, you got a little problem here. First off, the governor's not your authority. The Constitution is in this country. So you obey the Constitution, which gives you the right to religion, because if you remember in the Bible, before the kings of Israel could become kings and be anointed by the priests, they had to write out a handwritten copy of the Scriptures, and then they made a covenant with God. And then after the king made a covenant with God to the priest, the people made a covenant with the king after he had covenant with God. We choose our leaders after they've sworn to uphold the Constitution. Mm-hmm. They're not the leaders. The Constitution is. And so if a leader is violating the Constitution, it's like having a king in the Old Testament not violating the laws of God. And so they had the whole thing wrong about who the leader is, and said, by the way, what do you do with Acts 4, where they said we've got to obey God
rather than man?
The apostles were guilty of civil disobedience, and just about everybody in Hebrews 11 was guilty of civil disobedience. And you Christians, we got nothing to lose except maybe you get a $1,000 fine. That's all the governor was doing at the time, and you're scared of that, and you'd rather, Jesus said lay hands on the sick, and the governor said no, you can't do that. Jesus said baptize, no, you can't. All the things Jesus said to do in person, you can't do virtually. You can't have a virtual baptism.
So let me ask you this, and this is for my information. We held a meeting, got a cease and desist order and stuff, and if it was only the Constitution and First Amendment right, I'd just do it. If they throw me in jail, fine me, do whatever. But you also don't want to see people get sick.
Yeah.
And we did.
That's the voluntary side of it.
We had a number of people get sick at our meeting, and they say if 2 get sick with COVID, you've got an outbreak. So they classed it as an outbreak, and Teller County, where I live here, has an exemption from some of the restrictions because we were so low in the number.
Yeah.
But when we had the outbreak, 2 or more cases, that put the whole thing at risk. And so now the people in the community are sitting here saying, Charis Bible College, Andrew Wommack is spreading the virus and stuff. And I don't give a flip about the Constitution, violating it, because I know I'm free. But how do you deal with the people thinking that, you're sitting here spreading the virus by having meetings?
But you remember that was some of the stuff the apostle faced too, was all the false accusations Jesus faced. As long as you know you're doing everything you can to protect those people, and no Christian minister I know, no Christian I know is going to say, I'm going to follow the Constitution, I hope all my people get sick. And we're not going to do that. My gosh, we want our people well and healthy. We're going to look after them better than Governor Newsom or anybody else is going to. We're going to do better on that. But you will not stop the rumors, and that's one of the most effective things. Why did they call Jesus a winebibber and a glutton? It's all false. But if you can hurt the reputation of Jesus, then people stop following him, so the Pharisees start all this stuff. And a lot of it goes to you just got too big a following. And if you get too big a following, we're going to lie about you so that people won't listen to you. So from the standpoint, I don't know of a single pastor out there who wanted to endanger his people.
Of course not.
But I don't know why pastors would say whatever the civil authority says trumps what the Constitution says and what the Bible says and what ministry says. That should never have been a consideration. Yep. And that's again where we don't know the Constitution, we don't know the Bible near as well as we should, and we're lacking the leadership. Because the thing that I think has got to happen this time with what's going on, there's a lot of stuff come together. I think the COVID is what set the stage for the protest. The protest could not have done what they had done if it had not been COVID.
A lot of people out of work, a lot we not having anything to do. Yeah. Perfect.
That's right.
Perfect storm. Yep.
It's a perfect storm. So all of that comes together, and now we are at a time where we can demonstrably show that this stuff is being built on stuff that's not true. And so what do you do at that point? Because you have to love the truth. That's biblical, scriptural. If you love the truth and know the truth, it'll set you free, but only if you know the truth. So I think the thing that we have to do that we haven't done in a generation is defend the truth. We're not willing to stand up for it right now. We saw polling last week that 77% of traditional value Americans, guys like us, don't want to say anything because they don't want to be attacked. You know what? At some point, truth has got to mean more than your fear. And at some point, we're going to have to start standing up. And I think where we have missed it is we're thinking in terms of all the millions doing things right now. Don't worry about them. You just find one person and get that one person thinking right. If everybody, if that 77% would get one person thinking right, we'd have the whole nation.
Well, I believe we're in a cultural war just as much as Revolutionary War, the Civil War. It may not be fought on the same scale. Now it's fought in the arena of ideas and stuff. But comment on this. Where are we in this process?
Well,
is this something that's passing?
No, I think if we don't defend it now, we're going to be facing some serious things that none of us want to see.
Well, look. First of all, in terms of this so-called outbreak stuff, nobody knows where people get this stuff. I mean, nobody really knows. You know, we've heard of places where everybody's wearing a mask and there's a so-called outbreak. And we've heard places where nobody wears masks and there's no problem. I think there are a lot of unanswered questions here. And I think this is being used, as you suggest, to manipulate people, to create hysteria, and also to make people not like the church. I mean, our church never closed. We kept having services the entire time. And you know what we were told? I was trying to get people killed.
Yeah.
You know? And all we were trying to do was be faithful to God, who tells us, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as is the manner of some. Hebrews 10:25, but all the more as you see the day approaching. And so I think we've got a responsibility to do what God has called us to do. But the other issue is this. You know, I think that the only thing that matters, if we can actually get accurate numbers, is how many people is this thing killing? Because, you know, when it first broke, we were all told about it in a way that suggested we're all going to die. I mean, remember, we're all going to die.
I think they estimated 2 to 3 million in America.
Yeah, everybody's going to die. And, you know, when in fact, the actual death rate, I think at the worst, they were estimating 3%, 3.5%. Now we find out that the actual death rate is probably somewhere down around 1% or less. So to act like somehow this thing is the kind of epidemic you've suggested is, again, to me, a tool of manipulation. And the thing that concerns me the most is this. What is this setting us up for? I mean, if the spirit of totalitarianism, if people wondered before, well, you know, come on, America could never become that. Just look at the way this thing has been dealt with, and then tell me that again when you see leaders.
That's right.
The governor of New Jersey says, no, I didn't consider the Bill of Rights. It's above my pay grade. And he arrests two guys who opened a gym. Yeah, I mean, the oath you took. So for me, it's really a matter, as David was suggesting, of standing on the truth as best we can know it. And on COVID, I don't trust anything they tell us about it. Well,
the thing that I don't like, particularly, Proverbs 18:17 says, one side sounds good until you hear the other. And so iron sharpened iron is the proverb, and a lot of truth comes out from getting two sides. I hadn't thought about it. I didn't know that. I've never seen that before. You have to have that. And so what's happening now is they're shutting down media platforms, social media platforms, with any other alternative rather than what the one side is. What if there's truth out there other than what you're being told? Would never know. I mean, even our website yesterday got shut down, not because we put something up, because people who visit our website were making comments about, why don't we try this medicine? And so the social media came in and shut it down as false. How do you know it's false? You haven't ever had a test on it. You've never even allowed it to be tried. So we're in the point where we don't love truth. We're loving a narrative. And if something disagrees with that narrative, even if it's true, and they don't know whether it's true or not because they have mad. And see, that's the other thing that they're finding out. What we are finding out with numbers now is even at that 1%, nearly nobody died who was healthy. That 1% was nearly all complicating factors, especially if you're 70 and older and you have heart disease or diabetes. It's like it's killing nobody that's healthy. Now, some, I mean, it's really, really small.
I've heard that 70 to 80% of the people who died would have died in 2020 anyway because they were already terminal. And
so, but it goes to how much are we willing to give up? Because our experts keep telling us what to give up. And I think that at some point we have to put our foot down and say, no, I'm not, this is a bridge, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to hold this bridge. And at some point, if we don't, and this other thing continues to gain momentum, then it's harder to root out. That's the thing, was it in Matthew 13 where he talked about the enemy came in and sowed tares among the wheat. And once they grow up together, it's really hard to separate them. And if we don't get this stuff separated before it grows up together, then you damage the good stuff by taking out the bad stuff. And that's what has to be stopped pretty soon.
And that's why this election coming up is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because
yeah, that's right.
I think this president, look, we know he's not perfect. No president ever has been. But this man is a warrior for our First Amendment liberties. He's a warrior for our Second Amendment liberties. I think with all of his plain spokenness, he's a warrior for the truth. I mean, he just pretty much says it like it is. And people, of course, don't like that because they'd rather you use diplomatic language. He's not a politician. They'd rather hear the political speak and all of that. Wasn't it interesting? It was almost as if the media wanted us to turn our lives over to Anthony Fauci, just whatever he says. And yet, there's documentation that in 2005 he was saying hydroxychloroquine can help people.
Absolutely.
And then now, oh no, don't touch that. And you start to put all this stuff together and say, well, and here's the bottom line for me. What we're witnessing is the degree to which we're finding out that even our government that is supposed to be by the consent of the governed, we the people, doesn't trust the people to make their own decisions. They will make those decisions for us. The same thing with these media organizations. They think that their attitude is, and this is the attitude, here again, of the dictatorial, communist, Marxist, totalitarian spirit. People are too stupid to know what to do. We will control them, and we will tell them what to do, and we will make their decisions for them. And that's, again, the antithesis of what our founding fathers bequeathed us. A nation where we vigorously debate issues, everything gets put on the table, stupid, crazy, good things, and the American people wise enough to sort through that and say, well, no, that doesn't make sense, but okay, that does. But what they want to do is keep information completely away from us that they don't want us to hear, and you can only hear their side of it.
And because they're controlling all of the media and stuff like this, it gives you the impression that the whole nation is headed this direction. But I actually believe that there is a huge amount of the American public that is seeing through this. I mean,
that's what I think is going on, and that's why I think they have to stand, because if they don't stand, the perception will be that you're the minority and you'll get run over. But what we have seen polling, for example, when you see the protesters and the statues, it looks pretty much like this is widely accepted. How do you get Portland having protests for 50 straight days without getting shut down? You can't
have government that are for you.
Yeah, exactly. So when you look at the stuff, what we found is polling-wise, only 10% of the nation agrees with taking the statues down. Now, I wouldn't have thought it was that lopsided. Only and 84%. 84% agreed with leaving the statues alone, even Confederate statues. I wouldn't have thought it was anywhere close to that. And then the fact that the black community is the strongest of all communities in supporting police, that's not the narrative I was hearing. And I mean,
makes sense, though, because the blacks are the ones that are going to suffer the most if the police get
See, there are so many polling things that we're seeing. We were talking earlier, we've both seen now 2 polls where that favorability among Trump, among black folks, is at 41%. Now, that's got to scare the dickens out of us.
And historically, I bet you it's been closer to 10% or something.
Oh, it's been closer to single digits.
Single digits.
It's been
Yeah,
closer
4
to
or 5%
digits.
sometimes, yep. Exactly.
And so there's a whole lot I see that can be favorable, but not if they remain silent. That 90%, that 84%, that 67%, that 77% is going to have to start speaking up at some point. If they keep giving it over to these guys without any kind of opposition, then it's not going to be good. And so I am like you. I see a whole lot of things that give me great optimism if we can get courage combined with it. If we can combine courage with it, I think it's good.
I think that this has driven the liberals to such an extreme that anybody who is just casually observing is going to recognize that, man, this is not where I want to go. And I'm praying that there's a conservative backlash in the coming elections, and that, man, they vote out all of these people who voted to defund the police and allow their cities to be taken over. I think that
we are coming into. I think
so.
Backlash,
I really felt like something the Lord kind of told us. We have a legislative network, about 1,000 legislators, all 50 states, and so we have a conference every year. And really felt like several months ago the Lord said that not title for the conference is reset, because we're going to reset all sorts of things. We're going to go back to a reset on this. And so I've watched what's happened, and we monitor legislative stuff that's going on. And so far, since COVID started in late February in America and we've been shutting down, we've had 2,500 pieces of COVID legislation introduced at the state level, 2,500. The overwhelming majority are defending liberties and rights that the government has trampled on. And I thought they might be, we got to take more control from the people. We're going to give the governor more power. It's been the other direction. We got to take power away from the governor. We got to get away from the public health agencies. And so I'm seeing that there's this instinct going on with legislators right now that this is way out of bounds. I mean, in our state, we've got some of our very conservative legislators suing our conservative governor because he's, and so I'm seeing that uprising. We're seeing the same thing happening in these polls where the people are wanting to reset, but they're just silent right now. And so I really do think a reset's coming. I think we have the opportunity to fix 10 or 12 major problems in one session. And I don't know how I could have ever orchestrated this many major problems to be an issue. But stuff with parental rights, stuff with education and stopping the indoctrination. There's now a whole lot of state universities that are getting limits put on them because they're teaching so much crazy stuff. And parents are now finding out, I thought you were getting an education, you're getting indoctrination. So the limits being put on state universities, the fact that you're looking, several polls now show up to 40% of Americans looking at homeschooling their kids. Yeah, that's going to be a whole different, we couldn't have done that. We couldn't have paid for that. So there's still a lot of decisions to make, but I'm seeing the reset start to happen, and I think it's possible.
Well, September 17th, of course, is Constitution Day, and one of the problems we just cited is American ignorance of the Constitution, of what it actually says. And I hope that this will be an opportunity for Americans to really find out the glories of that document. I mean, our Constitution is the most successful governing document in the history of mankind. Now, that can't be by accident. It must mean we got something right, right? And we need to make sure that our elected officials live up to it, and we don't have these stupid comments like what Governor Murphy in New Jersey and de Blasio and
Don Lemon and media and others.
Yeah, these stupid things that they say. This woman in Chicago that understand they've taken an oath to the Constitution. We, the American people, have to hold them accountable to what it actually says.
You do that by voting them out.
Right. People have got to turn out and vote their constitutional and their Christian principles, because the other thing is, regardless of what anybody says, even the polls demonstrated, perhaps not to the level of commitment that we'd like, America's still a Christian country. And what we're seeing is an absolute attack on Christianity, not only through COVID, but through other means as well.
When they put up satanic symbols on
and they're burning churches and attacking churches and defaming churches. Yeah, and burning Bibles and all of that. So look, David, I think you're right. What they meant for evil, God can turn for good.
That's right.
And I really see a potential resurgence like nothing we've ever seen before. The American people rising up and saying, we're not going to allow you to take over our country. Our organization is doing something in September in honor of Constitution Day entitled The Constitution versus Communism, because we think that people need to understand that these values are coming out of Karl Marx. The stuff that we're witnessing is coming right out of the Karl Marx playbook. And that means this is not what it used to be. I've often pointed out that, when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, they saw things differently. But when Ronald Reagan got shot, Tip O'Neill was in the hospital room weeping, holding Ronald Reagan's hand. They disagreed and they debated and they came to agreement. That's over. Now, we're not talking about center left, center right, compromising, working it out. We're talking about the far, far left, off into a Marxist worldview trying to pull the country in their direction. And if Americans don't vote, if they don't get involved, we're going to lose our country.
To verify your point, I was with Senator Jason Rapert, and we held a conference, and he got sick with COVID. And when that happened, he got all kinds of mails saying, "We hope you die, and we hope all of your blankety blank family dies. It'll be a blessing to America." That's where we are, instead of Tip O'Neill coming in and holding Reagan's hand.
Exactly. And so as Christians, we don't want anybody to die. If we knew somebody was an avid opponent of the principles we stand for and they got sick, what would we do? Pray for them. Because we don't want people hurt. But that's a very American value.
But see, this is one of the things where we're paying a price. I'll go back to a 1980 case, memorize this thing, because the Supreme Court said it was Stone v. Graham. And the question was, in the schools of Kentucky, can you have a picture of the Ten Commandments up? It wasn't part of the classroom. You know, it's a picture of George Washington, a horse running through a pasture, and there's Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, and there's the Ten Commandments. And the question was, if you have that up, a kid might walk over there and read the Ten Commandments. And the question is that constitutional? And the Supreme Court said no, and here's what they said. They said, if the student were to read the Ten Commandments, he might be induced to meditate on the Ten Commandments. If he were to meditate on them, he might respect and venerate them, and that would be unconstitutional.
And terrible, wouldn't it?
So we're talking don't steal, don't kill, don't purge yourself, all these things you can't think about because you might do them. And I was thinking, you know, even with these protesters tearing down all this private property, because it is. They're going after businesses, they're going after statues that aren't theirs. If I went into their dorm room and started trashing their stuff the way they're trashing other people's stuff, they would not tolerate it.
Yep.
It goes back to the Golden Rule and the Good Samaritan. Golden Rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. You know what? That protester, there's no way they want me tearing up their car. There's no way they want me tearing up their stuff. But if we were still teaching things like the Golden Rule and the Good Samaritan, we wouldn't have the culture we have right now. And that's the other opportunity, is we have an opportunity to get back to some basic behavioral teachings. Not just belief, but behavioral teachings. Yep. And some of the most simple are the Golden Rule and the Good Samaritan. And man, what a different country we would have if we just used those standards.
If you were to burn their Quran or their demonic symbols or something like that,
go paint a cross on the Satanic Church, you know, what would they do?
Yeah, but man, the other way around, it's all right.
Yeah.
So we need to bring this to an end. We could just go on forever. You guys have been awesome, but let me say that you should know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Right. And I think we've put out a lot of truth, and if people will receive it, this is going to make a difference. But beyond just telling people the truth, are there other things? You mentioned voting. We definitely got to get out and vote. What can we do to turn this situation around?
Well, voting is one, obviously, but people have to engage, right, on every level. That means you got to stand up, speak up, and it may cost you something sometimes, but you've got to do it. I mean, there's more at stake than just your job or even your business. What's at stake is the future of our country. And so you've got to stand up and you've got to speak up where you know the truth is under assault. And the other thing, you got to get engaged. You got to support candidates who represent those values. You've got to contribute to them. You've got to go work for them and volunteer for them and knock on doors or make phone calls. In the age of COVID, not a whole lot of door knocking these days, but make phone calls. And then, you know, you got to support organizations that are on the front line. Truth and Liberty is on the front line. Wall Builders is on the front line. My organization, STAND, is on the front line. And there are a host of others. Support those organizations because we're devoted to full-time fighting for our country. Everybody can't do that, but they can certainly contribute to those who are trying to do it. So yeah, but what you can't do is sit back and let it happen. Forgive me, it's one of my favorite quotes. Ronald Reagan said, "Freedom is never more than one generation from extinction."
Really good.
We do not pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for and protected and passed on to them to do the same. We will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children about the United States of America, where we were once free. We can't let that happen.
So I know that you've got material on your website and stuff about this. We've been putting up the website throughout this broadcast.
StandAmerica.us is the website. We'd love to have people
Do you have
get involved
anything
with us.
specific that you'd like to direct them to
Yes, they could. Well, we've got a project working right now called Stand Against Communism, because we really believe that's what we're ultimately facing here. So they can go to that, they can sign up and volunteer for it, and our field people will get in touch with them and show them how they can get involved. We got a network of people in about 30 states that are working with us, and we can plug them into their local or state area.
So, David, what have you got at Wall Builders?
I would say the new book we have out called The American Story, The Beginnings, actually provides a lot of what we've been talking about on the narrative, because the racial stuff that nobody knows and how widespread it was and all those numbers, you need ammunition to be able to push back. There's a lot of times, I don't agree with that, but I don't know what to say. Well, we've got stuff you can say. There's facts you can push back. You can help young people learn what the truth is, because they're not getting it. They're getting a 1619 narrative. So at wallbuilders.com, the new book, The American Story, The Beginnings, is a great place to start. I would also send you to a website called christianvoterguide.com, because it will link you, whatever your state is, it will link you to voters' guides that show the biblical values of those running, so you can better choose who's there. You don't always want to choose on the basis of what their ads are, because that may not be the thing that really is important. Righteousness exalts a nation. I will say that right now with the presidential election, because this year I was involved in my 11th case at the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'll tell you that the 200 judges that have been appointed in the last 4 years are some of the most constitutional we've ever been with, ever. And right now, as Christians in America, we have regained religious liberties that were not there in my lifetime. I got white hair. And so they don't get much news, those guys, but I'm telling you, from a federal standpoint, Isaiah 126 says the righteousness of the land is based on the judges in the land. Right now, we have judges doing a better job on life, a better job on religious expression, a better job on Constitution than we've had in my lifetime. And so if we can get some more judges, we will see the nation turn in the future as a result of those judges. So those are the two things, is ChristianVoterGuide.com and The American Story.
And that means the outcome of the election has got to have a president who will appoint those kinds of judges, more of them.
That's right.
And of course, if you go to truthandliberty.net, we have links to dozens, maybe hundreds of other organizations, the one about the voter guide and everything else, and you can get a lot of information. Plus, you can get these programs archived, and you can download them and share this with somebody else. I tell you, we need to get these truths out. I think this has been powerful.
Amen.
I want to thank y'all. And let me just pray for everybody who's watching right now, all of us. We just agree. And Father, we pray that the truth sets people free. And Father, I thank you for David, Barton, E.W., and all of the awesome things that you've done in their life. And Father, we've been speaking truth that I believe is directly from you. We've been exposing lies and deception and rewriting of history and things. I pray that you use this to penetrate the hard heart, to penetrate the deception and the lies, this delusion that 2 Thessalonians 2 talks about, that there's a great delusion that they should believe a lie. Father, I believe that the truth is setting people free. Mm-hmm. And Father, we just thank you, and we ask the Holy Spirit to take this and just give it wings. Let this go all over this nation, even other nations, to help break this spirit of Antichrist that's trying to destroy this nation. And we give you praise in advance that we believe it's working. We believe that our nation's best days are still ahead. The best is yet to come in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching and being a part of it. Praise God. Share this with somebody else. They'll be blessed.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net.